Welcome to this session of the Uniface Universe parallel session about the what's new in the IDE. Let me start with introducing myself. I'm Jonke Corselius, working with Uniface for many years, and I will co-host this presentation with Gerton Leidecker. I'm the Scrum Master of the IDE team and also on the web team. Gerton is the product owner of the IDE and the web team. Yeah, as you can hear, we are using Agile and Scrum in our teams to deliver all the stuff that you're getting. How does it help you? Well, every 2 weeks you get a new patch, and we've been doing that consistently over a couple of months now. We are now in patch Gerton 40 something. A little bit on what we will be doing today. We'll tell you a bit about our mission, and that's then the lab's mission, or more specifically, in this case, we talk about what the IDE team is delivering you. We will do a demo of the highlights in the IDE, all the cool stuff and features that we've added over the last couple of months. And then I will give you a summary on the stuff that you have been seeing. So that's our mission now. The big goal for Uniface as a business, of course, but also our customers have given us many requests that it is very hard to find new developers that can work on their products. So what all the stuff that we do is around growing the Uniface community. That means adding more developers with Uniface knowledge. So we want to connect to developers that have never worked with Uniface before, and by creating a familiar development platform, something that they are used to work with or have learned in during their studies, so that they are not shocked by what they see first time when they start Uniface. So we follow consistent UI patterns, and that is familiar. The IDEs, the design is inspired by web browsers, so that you have also some connection with the stuff that you do outside of Uniface. We've tried to make all the editors very consistent, so that the actions over all the editors are sort of the same, and that the place where you have your stuff that you need to work on, that it's in the same place in every editor. So in the component editor, entity editor, you have a resource browser on the left side, the editing pane in the middle, and on the right side your property inspector. You will find that back in every editor. We are still repository based. It was a too big step to go to file based system. So I think that our customers are still happy with having to do their development in a repository, so which is stored in a database. That's the stuff that they recognize from before. All that together gives you easy access and overview. You can have more than one editor open at the same time, so that then you get some overview of the stuff that you're working on, actually adding your features, doing your fixes. That's demo time then. So Gerton, please show us all the cool stuff, and I'll see you later.
Okay, I have about 15 minutes to demo to you the IDE, which is not a lot of time, but still I will show you a typical way of using the IDE. In this case, I need to create a new derived component based on a modeled component for my web application that I'm building. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that and how I will be using the IDE for that. Okay, first I need to create a project. In that project, I'm going to collect all the objects that I will be working on in this exercise, so that I also later on have a way to keep track of all the sources that I've touched or changed, so that I know what I have to export and put back into source control. So let's create a project here, hamburger menu, and I will create a new project. So I will now start using the resource browser to pull in some of the objects that I need in the in my project. But before I do that, let me give you a quick introduction on how you use especially the U-bar in the resource browser, which is basically the same as the main U-bar here at the top. There are a number of ways in how you can use the U-bar. So in the main U-bar, if you click the browse button, then basically you can use the mouse or start typing, whatever you prefer, to select an object. You always have to select an object first because we are still querying a database, and the objects is basically the table selection that you're going to do. So for example, let's select a component, press enter, and then I will see a query on all the components in my repository. You see that there are only 50 results shown, which means there are more than 50. We only show 50 because to keep it snappy. If you want to do more because you really have no clue what you're looking for, you can actually do the show all, and that allows you to use your mouse to really browse through what is in your repository. In this case, I'm just gonna look for some objects that are called grid. So I will just type in grid, and I see a whole bunch of matches that match grid, whether it's the component name that matches the grid, or it's somewhere inside the component name, or if I would use, for example, server, then I would see also everything that has server in the description. So it's quite smart in that sense. Another way of using the resource browser, if you click immediately on the object itself. So if you already know that you need to query a project in this case, you can just click there, and that saves you the object selection. After that, it is the same as before. And the third one is that you click on the white area here, and you just start typing. And in this case, I'm just going to start DSP because I know it is a DSP. I see my suggestions made here, select it, and I will just create and select my component in this case. It was already open, so we'll just navigate to it, and that's it. So let's get back to our project. It's still open here, so I can click it. And I'm now going to use the resource browser to add the objects that I think I will be using in this project in the project, so that I have a nice collection of all the objects that are relevant. To browse existing objects, you select the Objects tab. And in here, I'm basically going to do as what I did in the main U-bar. I will just type in grid. I will find my model component that I will be using here, so I can now drag it in. And basically, now that I'm at it, I think I'm going to add all the ones that are ending with grid here. So I'm going to use multi-select and add those whole session in, because these are all derived components. You can see that based on this little arrow pointing up, which means I'm inheriting from something, in this case from a modeled component. This is then a model component that they all inherit from. And I now have a nice project where if I make changes to my modeled component, and I typically always have to recompile everything that inherits from it, I have now a single place where I can just push the compile button, and all those modeled components will now start being compiled in one go. So that's also very handy to have prepared. What I also need is my entity for which I need to create a grid DSP for. So let's select an entity here. And in this case, I need to use a grid construction for this modeled entity, persons.company. So let's drag that in as well. So the next thing that I need to do is to create the actual derived component that I need to deliver for this project. From the templates tab, you can create any component by just copying from the resource browser into the project, and then it will create an exact copy of that object, of that template. It's really a true template. All the properties and all the code is being copied. So it's actually quite handy feature to have all sorts of pre-cooked templates in there. Very handy for prototyping and that kind of stuff. But the moment you're reaching more in a production stage, then you want to have more proper inheritance in place. So in that case, you don't want to copy code, you just want to inherit code. So instead of using the templates tab, I'm going to switch to the model tab, which shows me all the modeled components that I have available in my repository, which is just two, but I mean, the one that I need is in there. I already have a reference to it, but I'm not going to create a reference to the modeled component. No, I'm going to create a derived component that is based on this modeled component. So let's drag in the grid modeled component, which will create a derived component that is based on the modeled component. It's given its a name. It's grid2, which is just a default name. We can see on the arrow pointing up that it is indeed inheriting from a modeled component. Let's give it the name that I need to give it, which is persons.grid. So let's open it up, double click. And I now see here my derived component based on the modeled component. We can see it here in the property inspector. If I have the root node selected, I can see that it inherits from CPT grid. Is it a modeled component? No, this thing, it's not a modeled component, but it does use a modeled component, and that is in this case grid. If I, for whatever reason, want to change the modeled component that it inherits from, for example, I renamed the modeled component, or I just create another one and I want to use that newer version of that grid, I can do that here. So it's not tied, it's just you can change this at any time because all the inheritance is resolved at compilation time. But in this case, grid will do, so I'm just going to keep it. Note that I've already been switching editors all the time. And the funny thing is that the IDE exactly remembers the state that it was left in the last time you were in that editor. So that's really, really useful. So what I now need to do is I need to probably need to do the binding for this modeled component. That did not happen just yet. So probably what I think is good practice, on the root node, you add some documentation, and in there are the binding instructions. So in this case, I need to bind the entity, which is apparently this one, to the database entity for which I want to have this grid widget working. And after that, I need to bind its field. Typically, there might be some other binding instructions or some other things that you need to resolve to get this derived component working based on the modeled component. Okay, so let's do that. So that is in version 10. It's just as easy as just clicking the object, and I will just, and when I clear the field, I get all the modeled entities that are available in my repository. So in this case, I need to connect it to person. So I will just type in person. There it is. It's the first one here. Press enter, and I have it now bound to this entity. The same I need to do for the fields. So let's do that as well. I can clearly see that these are only the fields of this modeled entity. I can still type something else in to make it a non-modeled field, but in this case I want to have the name field, and after that the address field, etc., etc. This is it. My component is now done. I don't have to do anything more. I can now just compile and test, and then it will inherit all the logic from the modeled component into the derived component, and it should just work. Now, for whatever reason, I see this web message popping up here. Apparently there is a little code in there that I did not expect. So let's get back to my modeled component here. So let's have a look at the code of this derived component. I'm going to double click the root node, in which case I will see all the code of the derived component. However, I don't see anything. It's basically empty. But I do see here in the modules, which is the compiled module information, that I actually do have a whole bunch of code being inherited from somewhere. If you hover over, you see where it's actually coming from. But what is way handy is that I can actually double click it and navigate to the source location of that code. So apparently, this execute trigger was inherited from my grid object, from my modeled component itself. And there indeed I see the web message. I don't want it. Let's get rid of it. I can now go back to my projects, just recompile everything because they probably all inherit this web message that I don't want. Recompile it, and then it should be gone. So let's check that, refresh, and indeed now it is gone. That's cool. Okay, so according to the instructions of my modeled component, there's one step that I need to do, and that's to generate some test data for the database entity. While doing development, that's actually really handy to just have an operation or an entry or whatever that is able to generate some test data to populate your database so that you actually have some data in your database to see your component working. Apparently I need to do that for this one as well. So it is, because it's related to the database entity, I probably need to implement it into the database entity itself. So let's go to my person.company, which is a modeled entity which implements the database entity. And indeed, it is database behavior. Yes, in database it says. So yeah, here it is. And then in the collection script of this thing, I need to create a test data generator piece of proc. Now the handy thing of the IDE is that it allows you also, next to templates, it also have snippet libraries. And snippet libraries can contain basically any kind of pre-cooked code, whether it's ProcScript, JavaScript, HTML code, it doesn't matter, that you often need to use. And you cannot necessarily inherit from it because there are some slight modifications in it. You just put them in those snippets, and then you can quickly insert those snippets. So I know that the snippet that I need to use is in useScript common, and it starts with probably something with testing. There it is. Partner operation, generate test data. That's the thing that I want. So I'm gonna say insert snippet. It will insert it at the cursor position, and this thing will be called by the generate test data button that we saw in the browser. So basically this thing, there's some instructions here. Use this website to generate some JSON, then copy paste result into this module, and then define a field. Okay, I can do that. So there is a website that is called generate.com. It allows you to set up some fields of a specific data type, and as long as you keep the same column name as the field name, then your JSON is going to be very close on what we need. So that's actually quite cool. Then I'm going to push the generate button, and I will just get a whole bunch of HTML being, or in this case JSON being generated. So I'm going to copy paste this onto the clipboard, get back to the IDE, and just basically paste it in here. There we go. Paste. That's it. This should be enough. Now, because we have in Uniface, of course, a JSON to struct, it's very easy to convert this block data with JSON into a struct. So this is my block data, and I'm converting it using JSON struct into a struct. And then I'm going to iterate the struct and populate the fields. So probably I need to define the fields here, which are and that's it. Let's compile. No warnings here. Let's go back to my project so that we can compile the whole thing. There we are. And if I now go back to my browser, refresh my page, now my generate test data button should work. Let's push the key. And indeed, it generated data. I can now store it. Store successful. Cool. I can clear. And if I now press the retrieve button, then I get the data. So that is great. One more thing that I want to show you. Let's have a quick look. No, first I'm gonna generate an error, because if you have a derived component, code should be as minimal as possible inside the derived component itself. You should be inherited it from as much as you can. That's just good practice that allows reuse. But it can be quite confusing at some point, because your derived component gets its code from all over the place. So this is a derived component, and we see here that there's no local level, component level code. It is all inherited from the derived component, but if I, from the modeled component. But if I select the modeled entity, then again there's no code, but I still inherit stuff, but now it gets it from the modeled entity. Now, inside the modeled entity, we still see a bunch of local code. And actually, yeah, some of that code is indeed specific for that modeled entity. For example, this whole code generation thing, that is really specific to this entity, this data. You don't want to have that inherited. It won't work for another table. However, all the way here at the bottom, like the read and the write, that's quite specific. So typically you want to generalize that in an include. Now, there's a very easy way in version 10 to do that. In 9 it was a container per trigger. In 10 it's just all in one, so which means you're just gonna put this on the clipboard in one go, selected everything, put it on a clipboard. I'm just gonna include my code in here. It's gonna be in system library, so this is gonna be called my database org level triggers. So I'm gonna create that include library. So let's get back to my project. I'm gonna look for my include library. So I'm gonna lib inc include library because I'm gonna put it in the system library. So let's add that to my project. Open it up. And then in here, I'm gonna add a new include proc. You see it's all everywhere. It's the same action to create new stuff. Just use the resource browser. I'm gonna call it database occurrence level triggers. Open it up, double click to get into the right script worksheet, and here I'm gonna paste my code in there. And that's enough. So I'm now gonna recompile this thing again. Then I still see that I get all those triggers inherited, but they're no longer in the model. So if I now double click in it, I will actually be navigated to my include library. So this MDI is really handy to keep track of what code do I have after compilation, so including inheritance and code generation or code inclusion by the precompiler. Just double click the CMI and you will be navigated to whatever the source is. And it goes a little bit further. So if I make a stupid mistake here, like putting well, something in there which is completely wrong, I'm going to recompile this thing, then of course I get this compile error. But also in the compiler output we have the same easy navigation back to the source, and in this case exactly back to the place where the problem is, which is still in my include library. So this will also works if I made a mistake in the modeled component or in the modeled entity. Doesn't matter. Wherever you make the mistakes, you will be navigated to that location and quickly fix your problem. So compile it, and we are now okay. Cool. Okay, leaves me one thing to do, and then I'm done. And then I can check in my stuff. I'm going to copy my new created derived component onto the clipboard. And then I'm going to update the project that basically breaks down my application on a functional level. So we see here the harness project, which is a top level project in all sorts of sub-projects, which are just functional modules. And in there is a project that's called grid, and that contains all the objects that are related to this grid construction. And as part of this grid, I also need to add my new person's grid derived component. Well, I have it on the clipboard, so I can simply paste it here, and then I will just paste a reference, so not the whole object, but just its reference will be added to this project. That's it. I hope you find it useful. A lot of stuff in there. See you next time.
So thank you, Gerton, for showing us all the cool stuff in the IDE that we've added over the last couple of months. So just a short summary of all the stuff that we've been showing you. We've shown you how to use projects, that you can use them to organize your work by having a compile option, export, etc., stuff like that in your project, so that you have an easy access and you get an overview of the stuff that you've been working on. We've shown you how to use copy and paste, where you can copy and paste from any editor to wherever you want to paste something, and the editor will decide if that is allowed or not. You can even copy paste from one IDE session to another if is that what you want. It is possible. We've shown you the use of that. We can now have multiple editors open at the same time. The state is preserved, so if you close your IDE at the end of the day, then the next day you come back, you restart the IDE, all the editors that you've been working on yesterday are still there for you in the worksheet that you've been working on. We have now code containers in the write script area that allows you to make a better use of functional includes, where you not are stuck to the triggers as you used to have them in Uniface 9. Now you can have multiple includes in one container and include that in one code, like a retrieve and a write in one functional include. That's very handy, I think. Undo, redo per code editor. So you're not undoing something that you have done in another editor. It's specific for that code editor that you're working in. A very nice feature that I work with every day is the compiled module information that allows you to navigate easily to something that we were never able in Uniface. So that's a very handy feature. So do use that. You do have to compile your stuff, of course, first. Smart suggestions, very nice added feature to, especially when you're working with large repositories, to find back the stuff that you need to add to your components, to your entities, etc. You'll find it anywhere: ubar, resource browser, property inspectors, etc. Modeled components, you can design them first, then you convert them to a modeled component. That's something that was never able before. The binding is now maintainable, so you're not stuck to having everything in place when you start. You can easily convert it afterwards. So that's a very nice feature. We've shown you templates. You can create your own stuff, the stuff that you often use, so that you can create your own defaults. We do deliver a lot of that ourselves in the IDE when you install it, but feel free to make it your own. We would like you to make it your own, so, and then you can share it with others if you want. That's very nice. It contains all the properties, all the code, and then last but not least, snippets. Also a very nice feature that you can use your own to create your own often used default constructions in code. You can use it to enforce coding standards. You can use it to make your own error handling, so that it's very easily to plug in into any code that you're editing at the moment. And also there a lot of useful snippets are already delivered when you install our IDE. So please have a look, download Uniface and start working. Thank you.